Okay, I think we're obviously standing between everybody and lunch, but I would like to really compliment, I think, probably Philip, the organizer here, in terms of the progression of the panels, where we start with a government regulator, then move on to intelligence and military, and now we're in the private sector. And fundamentally, one of the interesting aspects about the US in our critical infrastructure and aspects that are at risk from cybersecurity is so much of it is in private hands in the United States. And so how the private sector deals with, reacts with, interacts with government regulators, intelligence, military is critical to understanding the vulnerabilities that might exist in the US and how to address them. So I'm very honored to be joined on this panel by an amazing group of people who have mostly had both private sector and government sector experience. So it's quite interesting. I'll give brief introductions. Sitting immediately to my left is Kelli Andrews, who's the Senior Director for Cybersecurity and Lawful Access Policy at Microsoft, where she's responsible for advancing Microsoft's public policy initiatives in the area of cybersecurity, cybercrime, lawful access, and encryption in the executive and legislative branches. And prior to joining Microsoft, she spent almost a decade at the US Department of Justice, where she most recently served as Chief of Staff and Senior Counsel in the National Security Division. Immediately to her left is Jerry, who's is currently the Chief Information Officer for International Trade Administration. So in this role, he implements information technology services, solutions, and strategies for an agency of 2,200 employees across 100 US cities and 80 international markets. And he also has decades of experience leading global teams in IT operations and cybersecurity. Prior to joining the National Trade Administration, he was the Chief Information Officer and Assistant Inspector General of Information Technology at the Department of Health and Human Services during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. He also is the Tri-Chair on the Interagency U.S. Chief Information Officers Council on EOPS Committee for Zero Trust, something that has come up already and we'll talk a little bit more about. And then finally, at the very left, is Branko Terzic. He's the resident distinguished fellow on counsel and competitiveness and managing director at Berkeley Research Group in Washington, D.C. His national and international career in energy and the regulated public utility industries has included service as commissioner on the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, commissioner on the State of Wisconsin Public Service Commission, and as management consultant, engineer, and energy company chief executive officer. He truly has an amazing resume of private sector experience from Deloitte, also the CEO of Yankee Energy, managing director at Arthur Andersen, and serving on many different regulatory commissions. So brings a wealth of experience in the intersection between the private sector and particularly infrastructure in the public utility sector. So I want to start off asking each of you a question about really where you see the main vulnerabilities. And each of you come with different perspectives on sort of private sector, public sector regulation. And we've heard a lot about what CISA does and how it tries to work with the private sector in helping them understand vulnerabilities and fix them. And we obviously have you, Kelli, at Microsoft, which every single one of us uses in our day-to-day life on everything. So it's clearly very critical to so much of what we do. Based upon your experience, where do you think the greatest vulnerabilities are in sort of our private sector infrastructure? Maybe Kelli, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here and talk about cyber threats. As you know from the last panel, I think all of us that are in this world feel very passionately about it, and the intersection between cybersecurity and national security, of course, is now front and center. Having been in the government working on national security issues and now being at Microsoft in the private sector, a couple of things sort of stand out to me in terms of like what I would frame as the main threats. One, of course, is sort of how the US government is thinking about securing its own systems, right? And so that's, I think, sort of number one of how we think about threats here is really the US government and securing its systems. And the second area is, of course, critical infrastructure and the threats posed to critical infrastructure. As you all probably are aware, right, almost like 80% of critical infrastructure is actually owned by the private sector, not by government. And from my vantage point, having worked, particularly in the national security space after 9/11, the threat landscape is very different now. It's shifted, obviously, from a terrorism focus to very much of a nation state focus. But you can also see addressing these threats now is not really a government-only response. It's now integral that the private sector is a part of this. And so when I was listening to the panel before, and the idea of sort of layering in government being able to information share and share cyber threat intelligence and come together in a cohesive way, you also have to layer the private sector into that. So companies like Microsoft, we have 65 trillion signals that we get a day. That in 65 trillion, yeah, it's actually 75 billion a minute that we're looking at, right? So it's a vast global telemetry that we have and visibility into what's happening on the networks. And that is critical to informing our governments here, or the agencies here, about what's occurring and what anomalous behavior is on these networks that is visibility that the government doesn't have. And so that's just an example of, I think, some of the challenges that we have. I know we're going to talk more about nation state threats, but that's of course a big issue here, because basically nation states are targeting our critical infrastructure at a rate. I think for the past 2 years, when we looked at our data, 40% of nation state attacks are directed at critical infrastructure. So that's really an area that we need to focus on.
Jerry, what are your thoughts on this area?
Yeah, honored to be here. Thank you for having me. I can go off what Kelli was saying in critical infrastructure and that partnership with the private. We're moving to the cloud. That's our modernization path. And so we're relying more on our private partners to provide that infrastructure and to make sure it's protected. Now, one of the things early on when we moved to the cloud was the panacea of understanding what you were responsible for and what they are responsible for. Still, if I am putting data in the cloud, I am responsible for that data and protecting it, not them. They're going to take care of the parts that they did, but I got to know how to configure the things that I'm responsible for. And one of the things is that we have that's a challenge is, do we understand what we own, our data, and understanding what's more important? I like to use the analogy of, do we know what the crown jewels are? What is the most important thing that you own that you cannot do without? If it got taken, do you know what that is? Versus the bologna sandwich. If it got taken, okay, there's bread and bologna in the world. I'll make another one. Am I concerned? But were they able to get to my bologna sandwich and then ultimately get to my crown jewels? Understanding what the baseline is. I've found, it's not always the IT folks, people come to the IT shop, but there's the system owners. They have these great systems and it's sending data here, sharing data there and everywhere. You'd ask them, what are your data flows? What are your baselines? They wouldn't know. All they know is it comes in A and out B, and that's what it's supposed to do. But it's going to C. Is that right? It may not be. And what may be happening at C, probably we don't want to know, because that's going to be a concern. But understanding what the data is. I've had events where we just happened to see something that got out in the wild, data that got out in the wild, that triggered, hey, that probably shouldn't have been out there. And then it's like, oh, we had something happen. And it's been out there for a while. So our reaction time still needs to close for these things and understand what our data is and where it's going, and being able to understand that. The other thing is, we still have a lot of legacy. And I think our risk surface at the same time as we're trying to modernize our legacy and move to the cloud and the things and all those great technologies that they have today, it's not an easy lift all the time. It's not a lift and shift. And also, if you look at the risk surfaces we're creating, look at your home. You almost can't buy a light bulb with it being an Internet of Things. It's talking to your Wi-Fi. I mean, there's just more and more technology that's coming about in the normal everyday thing. Go knock on the refrigerator and I know if I need milk or not, kind of things. It's just amazing, and we have to protect that. But if I can hack your refrigerator, can I get to the next thing within your house? Kind of thing. So there's a lot of things, and understanding what the risk surface is we're protecting is very important.
So Bronco, out of all of us at this conference today, you actually are working and have always worked in critical infrastructure, in the utilities, in the energy. What are your views on this? How do you see our threat?
Just coming right off of what my colleague said, for Christmas this year, my wife gave me a coffee mug made by EERO Company, and it comes with a stand and it connects to the internet. And the coffee mug tells me when the coffee gets cold. I get a message on my phone that says you're down at 47 degrees, and then you push a button on the bottom of the cup, and there's a little battery and it heats up my coffee. Okay, so technically some guy in Russia could turn off my coffee, and I would really upset me.
Really hot.
I would be really pissed about, that kind of a cyber attack. But I do, ERO, it's a wonderful thing. So in 2015, the electric power industry, and I spent my whole career in the electric gas utilities industry. In 2015 was a wake-up call to the electric power industry when Russian hackers got in to the 3 electric utilities in the Ukraine, 2015, and shut them down. Not at the power plant level where everybody thought the attacks would be. They'd hit our power plants. No, it was at the distribution level when they went to the substations and automatically disconnected the switches. And they froze the laptop computers that the Ukrainian engineers were using to control them. The computers went dead and they couldn't reconnect their system for 5 or 6 hours till they physically went out and reconnected. And that was the wake-up call that this capability was out there. Lloyd's of London in 2000. So what were the headlines right after that? Right after that, the headlines in the newspapers and Forbes: as cyber threats to electric grid rise, utilities and regulators seek solutions. January 17th. Why utilities say grid security is the most pressing sector issue in 2017. April. Federal assessment finds gaps in preparation for electric grid attacks. The Hill, 2018. DOE unveils integrated strategy to reduce utility cyber threats. Bay, 2018. And the best headline in the next government magazine was: senators want dumber tech for energy grid cybersecurity. That is, let's not communicate with everything. Let's leave it analog, and then you won't be able to hack it, right? We'll leave it so that you have to send a crew out with a stick to disconnect the connector. You can't do it remotely. So that was what some senators' idea was of a good thing. Showtime. So most recently, I picked the October 6th edition of 2023 of the New York Times. There were 3 internet articles. The first one says, MGM Resorts said no to ransom, recovery to cost $100 million after hacker disrupted casinos last month. Number 2, AI spurs new cybersecurity threat, page B4. And number 3, at the bottom also there, Clorox warns of costs from cyber attack. Clorox has spent $20 million to respond to suspended ransomware attack, including hiring forensic investigators and legal and technical help. So one of the facts for business is I have small utilities telling me that 50% of their operating budgets are now going to cyber. It has become very expensive. Between 2018 and 2023, the spending on cyber has gone up 100% within here in the United States. Our vulnerabilities are people. We need to continually train people. People retire, new people get in. People are promoted, moved. Secondly, we have old technologies in much of our operating system. So we have IT, information technology, which is our billing and financing. And then we also have, which is continuously updated, and those updates bring new vulnerability. So the game in cybersecurity is there's an attack, they find a breach, you bring an update, close that breach, that new update has another potential breach in it, and it's a constant game of whack-a-mole. as new software brings more vulnerability, and you're constantly working on it. OT systems are separated. They operate machinery. They operate the power plants. They're not directly connected to the financial systems. We'll talk about Colonial on that one. But they have old software. Not even people around them know how to fix and patch that software. We do have a technology fix there where we can put hardware on that will protect against cyber, but that's not been done yet. This is a brand new technology from a company that I work with. And then of course the constant updating on software is something that has to be looked at all the time. So the Internet of Things makes us more and more, as we add more and more things to the grid, as your solar panel gets connected to the utility, so the utility can dispatch your solar panel. As your electric vehicle gets connected to the utility, so the electric vehicle battery can be used to balance the grid. Now all of a sudden, more and more vulnerable. There was a short period of time where Buick or somebody had an ad where the father was in the house, the mother had a Buick, and the father shows the kid how he could turn the Buick off and on from the house on his key. And of course, immediately after that, a couple of college kids showed how they could get in from their campus into your Buick and turn it off. I don't see anybody advertising that feature anymore, but that was out there available for a while. So that's our vulnerability.
Do you think our utilities are safer now than Ukraine's was in 2015, or have actually, because of the whack-a-mole, hasn't actually gotten us any safer?
There's a lot of progress been made. The awareness has been there. The training has been there. One of the earlier speakers talked about simple physical security. If somebody can walk into your office and sit down at a desk station and you've left your laptop there, most of us use, they can find your password, come in. So let's keep those people out of our offices, right? Number two, put your laptop away when you're not using it. Lock it up, don't let that. So there are all kinds of physical security and other things that have been improved. Double identification systems where you get on, like at my firm, I get on my laptop, but then I have to verify it's me with my iPhone. So even if somebody got into my laptop, they didn't have my iPhone telephone number, whatever. So all of these things have helped. I think we're much better off today than we were in 2015, obviously, but the attackers are much smarter too.
Right. I think that's one of the challenges. It seems like as we keep making advances in defense, the offense seems to be getting stronger all the time. And it raises this question of resources. And how do we have enough resources? How do we have enough resources to combat this? And the interplay between government and private sector. What's being funded by government? What's funded by private sector? And Kelli, if I can come back to you, our first panel today from the CISA executive director, which I found very fascinating, partially because I guess I'm ignorant. I didn't know we had CISA as an agency. Obviously, that's the 5 years. Okay, I haven't been paying enough attention. It's part of Department of Homeland Security. How well he described his cooperation with the private sector as being very efficient and effective, notwithstanding the fear, as was the investor mentioned about I'm here from the government, I'm here to help. It's not usually what people want to hear. How have you found it, Mike? You guys must do tons of stuff with the government. How do you find that relationship? Is it positive? Is it not? Be curious in your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think one sort of level set when you think about industry and the government cooperating is you have to develop trusted relationships, and that doesn't happen overnight. And so from Microsoft's perspective, as an example, we have a really, really close analyst to analyst relationship with the NSA that's been born out of many, many years of kind of sharing threat intelligence that we're seeing. And that's a relationship that took a long time to develop, but it's extremely effective. And I think that, as we're sort of talking about, I'm sure CISA was kind of referencing that larger sort of cyber threat intelligence sharing landscape, right? And how do we integrate what the private sector is seeing from a cyber threat intelligence standpoint with the government? That's obviously a much bigger challenge because we don't have any easily models to go by that work really well there. And so I think that, CISA is doing a great job of they're not a regulatory or enforcement agency, and they're purposely designed not to be that in order to foster these kinds of connections with industry that I think a lot of companies would say, like to the point about the FBI, right? Like, why would I call the FBI when like I don't have a reason to, right? So I think CISA plays an important role in that area and kind of developing those relationships, bringing those groups together. But I do think that once you kind of have that, it's the larger question of how do you really share cyber threat intelligence in a meaningful way? And how does the government provide information back to the private sector that's actually useful? Because you will hear a lot of industry say, it's a one-way street, right? And as I'm sure many can appreciate in this room, a lot of the cyber threat intelligence that the government has can be classified, and it can be very, very difficult and time consuming to try to downgrade that to where you can share it with the private sector. And I know those are challenges that this administration has been working on in terms of, for example, having different sector agencies actually come in and get classified briefings on what threats that they're seeing, right? So to try to educate them a bit as to what the threat landscape is, because I think for a lot of businesses that kind of like, they hear all this scary stuff out there, right? But they're like, well, I'm not seeing this on my network. I don't know what you're talking about. Are the Chinese really going to go after me, right? And so a lot of that, I think, helps in terms of trying to develop and have this more two-way sharing information.
I think you're sufficiently senior that they probably would want to go after you. So I would expect that. Jerry, you're involved a lot in zero trust organizations. And we heard about that before, the analogy that zero trust means not just having a guard at the gate, it's a guard at the room and another room and a double authentication to get into the computer and everything else like that. How well does that actually work in the private sector? Is that so expensive, so time consuming that people are not really going to implement it? Or is that really a solution that is very important for the private sector?
I think it's very important for the private sector, but the thing and one of the things we're doing in the nonprofit working group that I'm in, we started with 70 vendors, and everybody comes to my door. I got zero trust for you. There is no one zero trust vendor. There is no silver bullet. There is no going to Best Buy, buying something off the shelf, installing it, and you're zero trust. That's not going to happen. The thing about zero trust is understanding the principles of what it is. It's not a technology. A lot of people start talking about technology, but it's a methodology, it's a concept, it's an integration, it's a framework. It's all of those things. And people will argue with me on a bunch of other things, but at the end of the day, understand the 5 principles of zero trust, as they were published by Forrester by Mr. John Kinderlach. Great gentleman, by the way, and he has a great analogy for it. But when it comes to zero trust, it's an integration effort. It definitely is an integration effort. So we had 70 vendors we started with, and we gave them their time in the sun. Every one of them had an hour and a half, present your zero trust. And we asked them, we had a matrix, and we said, what functional capabilities do you cover so our audience knows? And then we went to phase 2. All had their time in the sun, we went to phase 2. Now we want you to partner or get your best integrators and come back to us and do these 13 use cases. We ended up with about 10. And that kind of is a story. Some of them aren't ready to integrate, or they really haven't made those partnerships to be, compatible with the other technologies that we have. And also, if we're all government agencies or even within bureaus within agencies, like at the State Department, there's different technologies in all the bureaus. So my zero trust isn't going to look the same as yours. That's going to look the same as yours. I've already made investments. What can I leverage? And a lot of people don't do that as is and understand. They just say, all right, I have to do this identity pillar. And here's the things I need to be able to do. Let me go find an identity. It's not like that. So my analogy for zero trust really quick is I like to use the movie theater. I already talked to you about the bologna sandwich and the crown jewels. The crown jewels is the IMAX, right? Versus the regular showing. That's data. Data is what we're trying to protect at the end of the day. Now, you're all extremely important people, and in your time, you've had some access to some very specific, very sensitive data. you're a good target, right? If there's policies going on somewhere in the world that, the media is talking about, I know people. There's a lot of information about a lot of people here on the dark web that would scare you a bunch. But going back to the movie theater, multiplex movie theater, multiple movies being shown at any time. I buy a ticket, whether that be online or I walk up to the box office, I buy a ticket. Where do they scan my ticket? They scan it in the lobby. Now I have access to the concessions, the restrooms, all of those things, in the general lobby area. Go buy my concessions and I walk up to the movie. I walk right straight in. I find a seat, I sit down, movie starts showing. That's the Tootsie Roll Pop security, right? Soft, hard outer shell, somebody scanned my ticket to get in to the perimeter, and soft gooey center, right? And we know it took Mr. Al 3 licks to get to the center of the Tootsie Roll Pop. Now, what is different in zero trust? Remember, the movie is the data that I'm consuming, and there's different levels of data. There's the new releases, the old releases, different prices, of course. But when I walk into the movie, yes, do I get scanned in the lobby, my ticket? Yes, I'm allowed to be in the movie theater. I have access to those general things. I go show up at the movie theater door. There's somebody there to check my ticket because that's the movie I paid for. They're checking to make sure that's the movie I paid for. All right, this is the movie I paid for, come on in. And I go, I sit down, and the movie starts. But the other key thing that we have to understand with zero trust is it's not one time through the door, have a nice day. We have to constantly check a lot of the factors that are going on. Are the lights down? Is the movie showing on the screen? Is the screen down? Are the exit signs lit? Are those little lights, on the floor lit, like the airline pilots will show you, kind of thing. I'm checking all those factors because if some anomaly happens, projector breaks, something, I have to take an action. So I got to use all that data and all that telemetry that I have available to me to make decisions and understand what my baseline is. This is my baseline. These are the things that are working. Now, let's say I'm going to back up a little bit, go into the movie theater, bought my ticket, go in the lobby. Oh, the IMAX version, I bought the regular ticket, but the IMAX version is showing in 5 minutes. Show up at the movie for the IMAX. No, you bought a ticket for the other show. If you want to come to the IMAX, go upgrade your ticket. So back to the box office, step up authentication, so to speak, higher level of authentication to get to a higher level of data. So go back, show my ticket, yes, have a assigned seat, usher comes in, and remember the ushers, making sure the kids, in the old days, making sure everybody wasn't doing any hanky-panky in the back of the, but they're coming in and constantly checking, I'm in the right seat, the right people in the right seat, the movie's showing, projector works, and it's constant. And understanding what those risk thresholds for taking what action I need to take is very important. And I think a lot of people jump to the technology and the tools, but they don't know what their risk tolerances are and what they own and what data they own.
Yeah, my law firm recently has put in, we have a new office in Palo Alto and have to scan our card like to go anywhere. And I figured they just want to keep track of how many times we go to the bathroom or something. Because I have to scan it every time I go to the door that gets me to the kitchen and the bathroom, which strikes me as not really the crown jewels of our company. But Bronco, going, you mentioned that it was mentioned earlier, but I don't think everyone is as familiar with the Colonial Pipeline situation. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about that and perhaps what we've learned from that experience and hopefully improved ourselves.
Yeah, on May 7th, 2021, criminal hackers hacked into the IT system, the financial system, the billing system of Colonial Pipeline, and with a ransomware request, and asked for $4.4 million in Bitcoins. Colonial Pipeline is a products pipeline. It carries refined gasoline, refined diesel, and fuel oil from the Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, all the way up to the East Coast. So up here in Washington and New York, Pittsburgh, our gasoline and blended gasoline is coming off a Colonial Pipeline. They hacked the system. Everything was shut down on the IT side, and Colonial decided, because they couldn't figure out who to bill, that they would also shut down the pipeline itself. So the hackers did not shut down the pipeline. Those were separate software operating systems that control the pumping station, the diesel pumping stations every 50 miles on that 1,000-mile pipeline. But Colonial shut it down because they couldn't figure out who to bill for this service, causing the President of the United States to declare a national emergency when gasoline stations, after a few days, were short of oil. And they paid the amount. Later, the FBI was able to recover $2.3 million in software, and the hackers issued an apology saying it wasn't our intent to hurt anybody in the public, we just wanted to get the money. So it was really odd sort of a thing, and that was a great. Let me mention another attack. How many of you have heard of what happened to Maersk Shipping? Yes. So on January 27th, 2017, Russian hackers hacked into the Ukrainian tax software and immobilized it with a virus. Maersk had one computer connected with that Ukrainian tax download, where they downloaded the Ukrainian tax software into one of their regional offices in Ukraine, and the virus went all the way through 17,000 Maersk computers, shutting them down. This was called the NotPetya, P-E-T-Y-A. So there was an earlier virus called the Petya virus, P-E-T-Y-A, which was ransomware. And if you got infected with Petya, it shut you down, and then you paid your money, and they could send you a code which would unscramble your system and put you back in service. This was not Petya. It was purely design damage. They had no capability of sending you a code to unscramble your system. You had to close everything down. So Maersk was operating in 76 ports. They had 800 ships at three. They're in 130 countries. It cost them $300 million to repair the system. And the only way they were able to repair the system was there was an electric outage in the country of Ghana. And the Maersk computer there was not infected by the virus. And that was the only program they had that they could duplicate. So they sent a courier down, and the courier took that hard drive out, flew it up to their headquarters. They mass reproduced it, bought 17,000 new hard drives or new machines, and had an uninfected program that they could put in. The same software also got into FedEx, that got into Merck Pharmaceuticals, M-E-R-K. Merck Pharmaceuticals said it cost them $820 million, and a company called TNT Express, which I believe is a federal carrier, international carrier, was also infected to the tune of $400 million. Those are unintended targets. The target, of course, was Ukraine. So it's a wonderful article in Wired magazine. It's also a book on that particular episode.
And the Colonial Pipeline one is very interesting, particularly when you look at it versus the Ukraine 2015 attack as well, in that because, again, our infrastructure, so much in the US is controlled by private companies who fundamentally are designed to make a profit. The fact that the result, even if it was unintended, of them hacking into a billing system and stopping that, meant that people stopped selling the product, which of course is what any private business would do. They're not going to give away product for free if they can't actually bill for it. I mean, it shows the real vulnerability that you can go after that weak spot, and then you can have various unintended consequences or intended consequences. It's also interesting that that attack, as well as the MGM one that was mentioned earlier, were not by nation states. These are by, people trying to make money, like North Korea does, but in these cases, private sectors. So maybe, Kelli, if I can come back to you in terms of how Microsoft looks at the risks from private sector hackers versus nation states. Are they on the same level? Are they different? And sort of where do you prioritize those?
Yeah, I think I would say we definitely prioritize nation-state hackers and certainly cyber criminals. And we do a lot of extensive work looking at our nation-state adversarial, right? So we look at China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. And we have a very robust both threat hunters and then analysts and then folks that sort of put together all of this information, thinking about the geopolitical context surrounding what we're seeing and why we're seeing it. So we do a lot of reporting on that as well to kind of inform the ecosystem. You know, one thing that I think just to kind of highlight for the group as we think about critical infrastructure and how nation states, you know, are potentially looking at the US and targeting us. One, you know, recent reporting that we did and we're continuing to work on with, of course, our federal government partners is a Chinese-based actor called Volt Typhoon. I don't know if you guys have seen any of the news about this, but it's an actor that we reported back in May on. The reason this is such a, I would say, extremely concerning actor is because of the techniques that the actor has used. Basically, this Chinese actor that we've been following for several years has essentially burrowed into critical infrastructure throughout the US and Guam, targeting particularly communications, transportation, that type of critical infrastructure. And they've done so in a way that, first of all, the way in which they get into the networks, they actually exploited, when you think about your home and small office router systems, right, like that are a lot less protected and sort of more consumer based, that's the way in which they got in. And what we found most concerning is not only the way in which they got in, but basically that they also were able to essentially, we call it live off the land, but essentially burrow into these networks and do so in a manner where it's very, very difficult to detect them because they're basically not having any anomalous signals within the network to look at. They're not putting malware into the network, right? They're not doing anything that looks unusual. And so we decided as a company to sort of publicly talk about this, and our government partners as well put out a whole advisory sort of alerting critical infrastructure owners and operators that they really need to dig into their networks, and this is why, and gave as much details as possible. But I raise this because this, you know, kind of goes to what the prior panel was discussing about tunneling. This really is tunneling. It's happening, and I know we and our partners in the government and the private sector are working to try to uncover this activity. But I think the way we've been looking at it is that this was essentially a pre-positioning opportunity. If and when there is an invasion of Taiwan, these could be ways in which they could conduct destructive attacks potentially on our critical infrastructure. And you know, I think that this is such a significant threat and something certainly that we've tried to alert critical infrastructures owners about. We've obviously been working with our customers on it. It's an incredibly difficult threat to find, to dig into your network and see if they're there. And so, you know, this is kind of, to me, the Chinese sort of playing off of what the Russians did very well in SolarWinds. But this is, I think, ratcheting it up because it's really about what their geopolitical ambitions are, you know, in the Asia Pacific region. And so that's something where I feel from our company's standpoint, we really think that the telemetry and analysis that we can provide to the global community about what we're seeing, especially in the nation state space, is so critical to all of us in our cybersecurity.
Maybe I'll ask one more question to each of you, and then we'll open it up to questions from the floor. I think one of the challenges of our federalist, you know, system we have in the U.S., which is also one of the strengths of it, is that we have, you know, different regulatory levels, and people have different, you know, ability to regulate in the private sector versus the public sector. But as a result, sometimes it's hard to actually get everybody to do anything, or to get everybody to do the same thing. The question to each of you: if you were the benign dictator of America, and you could cause anything to happen or cause everybody to do something, what do you think is the most important thing we could do at the moment to make the U.S. safer in public and private sector from, you know, nation state cyber threats? I guess maybe Bronco, I'll start with you.
God, I wish you wouldn't. Education, I think we still have a long ways to go till everybody within private organization and the government is cybersecurity aware, is aware of phishing, is aware of physical security, is aware of the necessity for multiple levels of security. I think we're still vulnerable on that, and we still have a lot of way to go.
Jared.
Agree. I'm gonna add something else though, but yeah, humans are our weakest link sometimes. Because it's not always a malicious user, but it's just that person trying to figure out how to get something done to get their job done. But the bad guys can take advantage of that too. So humans, definitely. The other thing is, and man, you asked this question, I'm gonna get myself in trouble. Hopefully we're in the cone of silence.
I know, we're in a.
No, but one of the things is Jerry's opinion is that the federal government is still very compliance focused. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with compliance. Compliance has a place, but there's a big difference between compliance and effectiveness. Compliance is a good way to measure things. However, if the control says I have a system, I must provide authentication. Username and password, check. But that's not effective. I think we have to figure out better ways to measure our effectiveness of our cybersecurity in the federal government. Because I'm sorry to say this, but I've seen the game played where we're trying to check the boxes and to be compliant, to keep, you know, the OIGs and stuff off people's back. I've seen people do it. But how do I measure effectiveness? There's not enough resources to pen test, but can we do automated pen testing in a way that we're doing constant pen testing, things like that, and really understanding where our weaknesses is? That's where I think we really need to figure out is doing that shift from this compliance to being, if we want to be effective at cybersecurity, better measuring it and understanding what our posture is.
Yeah.
So agree, but I would say if I could wave my magic wand, first I would get all critical infrastructure and the US government onto the cloud ASAP. So totally off of on-premises systems completely. So that would be number one. And then number two, I think really harnessing, you know, I think AI is going to bring really a lot of promise to cyber defense. And so I think that being able to harness those capabilities in a way that's really going to help up level not only the government, obviously, but critical infrastructure businesses as well in terms of cyber defense. I think that's really going to be a game changer too.
One does wonder how much people can be improved at the end of the day, and AI, I guess, potentially.
Yeah, AI is going to be definitely an advantage to take advantage of, but my scary thing is they're going to use it well at the same time.
We could have another discussion about also all of that too.
Yeah, that is a whole discussion.
Yeah, Michael, if I was still CEO of Yankee Energy System, which is a regulated New York Stock Exchange company, right now I'd be under SEC regulations requiring me to give disclosure of any material breaches. Now I have to define what a material breach is. I don't want to have material breaches, and I don't want to have to disclose it. Secondly, also the SEC wants to know, do I have any member, how am I handling cybersecurity, and do I have any board members who are cybersecurity experts? So that's at the SEC. On the other side, insurance companies are stepping in and saying, we want higher deductibles. We want to know that you're doing something with that, and we're not going to insure certain types of activities. So I'm going to have a problem there vis-a-vis my insurability, and so that's going to make me also want to be more cyber secure to lower my insurance premium and not have to face a large deductible.
So, questions from the field, Ambassador.
Kelly, I have a question specifically about your last recommendation. Get all data offsite and onto the cloud. That to me is a little counterintuitive. At least with on-site data repositories or whatever, there are multiple targets to attack. You must think extremely highly of the invulnerability of the cloud, since cloud houses everybody's data. It probably has defense in depth for different clients' portions of what's stored in the cloud, But it still seems like getting through the very first wall gets into a rather large, if you would, safety deposit box for many clients. Could you unload that a little more for us?
Yeah, sure. So totally, it seems like kind of counterintuitive, right? It's like, oh, now there's only one target for the, right? Like the nation states just need to go after the cloud and that's it, right? But really, the amount of cutting edge cyber defense capabilities that are contained within the cloud just supersede anything that sort of, when you think about managing your IT systems on premises, it's just much more unlikely that there's going to be penetration. Now, of course, nation state adversaries are always going after the cloud, right? They're always going after vulnerabilities, but I think, you know, from a standpoint of kind of looking at all of the different areas of what we call cyber hygiene that essentially are not happening on premises, including just regular patching, right, and keeping up to date, all those things, all that's done in the cloud, and then you add in all of the like data analytics and algorithmic capabilities of both AI and other telemetry that we're able to put into the cloud and defend it. There's just no other no other way. So
Actually, I'm with you on that. I keep my family finances on Quicken at home on a computer that has no connection to the internet, cannot be accessed by anything. Just physically, the only place I can get it is right there, which I thought was a pretty secure solution, but I guess maybe I should put it in the cloud. I don't know. Other questions?
I just want to add the speed at which we can do things in the cloud is so much more than what I could do if I have to go to the data center, get somebody access to the data center, do all those logistics. I can spin up a server within minutes in the cloud than doing all this stuff and not having to image. There's images readily available. I can do so much more in the cloud, so much quicker, and react to things and change things and patch things. It's the time to value is so much quicker.
Nobody wants another question before lunch, so please, that's another one.
Listening to this set of presentations particularly brought to mind something of an analogy to the world of CI, counterintelligence. I'm not an expert in counterintelligence any more than I am in cybersecurity, but in CI, the greatest vulnerability, frankly, are human beings. They're people who give away, either foolishly or inadvertently or selfishly or corruptly or egoistically, the keys to what the adversary is seeking. Is there any CI analogy in the cyber domain? I mean, CI, referring to the last panel, it leaves traces. There are things that can be picked up. There are things that can be found out. It's not like a room where nothing is disturbed and no one can tell you've been there ever. But I'm just wondering, as we focus so much on machines and machine logic and tunnels and so forth, if the human dimension here is another important aspect of cybersecurity that we haven't really commented on at all.
Well, I think actually the notion that Bronco and both Jerry spoke about education essentially is educating people because they are the weak points in the cybersecurity. I actually had the pleasure this July to attend DEF CON in Las Vegas, a sort of hacking conference. And they had an incredibly interesting session where we were sitting in the audience and people were put, it was a competition, people were put in soundproof rooms, 5 minutes and a telephone, and told to go get access to a specific company's IT system. And the ability for these people to do that was just incredible. They would just call up, I think one of them was pets.com, try to get access to the right person and then convince them that, I'm at this IT and I need this and oh, I'm sorry, I don't have that. And just incredible what people can accomplish. And it really is that people are frequently the weakest point. And we're always going to have people that are weakest point. So how do we avoid that?
Yeah, the old methods still work.
Education is the corrective for ignorance and negligence. It might not be the antidote to malice,
No,
which is
that's
the
right.
main motivator of CI.
No.
Yeah, one of the things, and Bronco, you brought up the MGM, and if I remember correctly, is with that, they went and looked at LinkedIn and found out who works at MGM and called up, the help desk, and that's how they got the information they need to do the havoc that they did. I mean, the elevators were shut down, that you couldn't get money out of the ATM machines, the slot machines were all shut down. Everything was completely shut down. You couldn't make reservations, everything. You don't realize, the gentleman was talking about his Facebook today. People post their pet pictures and things like that. It seems harmless, but you know what? I hate to say it, but these nation state people are learning things about you. Oh, you like dogs. Oh, I like Jeeps. If you know me, I like Jeeps. They're learning things about you. They know more about us than you know. I think sometimes, and it's really kind of scary. That just what you think is doing harmless, posting a picture of your kids on Facebook and everything, you're letting people know something about you, and they still use the tried and true methods that you alluded to of that kind of information is useful.
And that's even when you don't have someone acting maliciously. Obviously, if internally you have someone acting maliciously who has access, I mean, that's where zero trust, I guess, comes in.
And that's a great thing about zero trust. I don't care if you're an insider threat or if you're an external threat. I trust no one until I have had some kind of verification at a certain level that doesn't reach a threshold that I will let you do what you are trying to do.
So you're limited to your corridor, you're not going to be able to destroy much else. Well, I think with that, maybe it's time for lunch. So thank you very much, and thank you all.